Dr. Ed Barrett, Director of Research, Ethics Research, particularly at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. Welcome, and thanks for making the time for a conversation today.
Hey, thanks.
I should also add, Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. So
Yes.
you're a Renaissance man here.
Yes.
How does a retired Air Force colonel wind up at the Naval Academy in the first place? Give us a little bit about your backstory.
It's a little bit of a Gilligan's Island story. It was supposed to be a one-year postdoc, and it turned into a career.
Right.
But I was active duty C-130 pilot for 9 years, and during that time became very interested in political theory and ethics, and started getting a master's degree in those, and then decided at a certain point after 9 years that I wanted to try to make an academic career out of it. Loved teaching. I was an instructor pilot and loved that material there too. So I left active duty, stayed in the reserves, and continued flying C-130s at O'Hare in Milwaukee, and went to University of Chicago and got a PhD in political philosophy, basically, and with a heavy dose of ethics in there. And then when I finished that in 2003, I was activated for 2 years, and then looking for a job, ended up here on a one-year postdoc, and here I am still.
Well, you mentioned you were here for a one-year postdoc.
Yeah.
You were here as a research fellow.
I was
as
one of
part
my
that
fellows.
program.
Yeah.
That's right. And since being hired full-time as a director of research, you host fellows on an annual basis, and with those fellows do a deep dive into a topic of ethical interest to the military generally, but particularly to the Naval Academy.
Exactly.
Could you talk a little bit about your program and how that works every year? How do you select a topic?
Right.
What's the nature of the conversation? How is it plowed back into the benefit of midshipmen, staff, faculty, coaches of the Academy, and beyond?
Right, exactly. Well, I have my ear to the ground for an ethics topic relevant to military operations that's timely.
Right.
And maybe it's not being studied at all, maybe studied wrongly or very little. So, and those fall within 3 groups. I was looking at all the old topics, and basically it's the topics are related to military ethics, to virtue ethics, or to, I'd say, political philosophy, especially liberal theory. And so what I do is just see what I think needs to be done every year, and then you and I talk about that, of course, and David Luban weighs in on that in the past. And then we decide on a topic, and then I hire fellows, advertise for and hire fellows with the requisite expertise on that topic.
Talk about some of those fellows, just as you started that way.
Yeah.
You've had quite a bench of talent in the form of visiting fellows. What do they look like? Where do they come from? What's their background? What are you looking for typically in the folks who come here?
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking for somebody who has the requisite expertise. So it just depends on the topic. But typically, I'm looking for somebody who's an ethicist, philosophical ethicist, maybe a theological ethicist, or a political theorist. Political philosopher. And so those are the 2 main types. And then in terms of the type of person in their career, I get very junior people right out of a PhD program, or somebody who's had maybe a postdoc or 2. So kind of a junior baby philosopher. And then I look for people who are on sabbatical too. So mid-career, late career. And I try to get a mix of those 2, depending on who applies. Sometimes I get more of one than the other. But that's my goal, is to get a balance experientially, and also, frankly, ideologically.
Right.
I look for ideological balance too, to get all the opinions in the room.
Sure. Now, these folks are drawn from universities around the country, in some cases around the world, right?
Yeah.
Here, oftentimes, you said, at least for the senior folks, they're here on their sabbatical year.
Yep.
And they have a conversation, a weekly conversation. They do some teaching while they're here.
They do.
So they get in the classroom with midshipmen, and then their work culminates in both a conference and in a publication. Can you talk about those end products?
Yeah, the end products. So the McCain Conference is the annual conference that's the culmination of the research seminar. And it's attended by faculty at all the military educational institutions, including the staff and war colleges that teach ethics, law, and leadership. And it's basically a 2-day mini course on the topic. Right. And there are usually about 150 people that attend that. And the fellows help me build the conference, and then also they speak at the conference, and then they end up publishing their own work on the topic. And we do an edited volume at the end of this year too, which disseminates what we've researched.
And dissemination being one of the key roles played by the Stockdale Center. This is a primary way that we disseminate ethics research out there to the broader world.
Exactly.
Certainly to the U.S. Department of Defense,
yeah,
other service academies, and so on. So that's the legacy, that's the impact.
It is
that you're responsible for.
It is, yeah. And it's interesting. I see within the military ethics community these topics landing, on their research plates because of what we've done here.
Right.
We basically generate interest in some of these topics through the years. I want to emphasize too that the midshipmen benefit from this. I have a couple of 3 to 4 midshipmen in the seminar too, preparing for graduate school.
Right.
But also many of the electives that we teach and the readings that we use in the core ethics course come from this research year. They were written by our fellows or myself or David Luban.
Right.
So, I think we at last count about a third of the readings in the core ethics course come from that program.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Contributing to the body of knowledge, as they say, in this broader field. That's terrific. Now, what are some of the topics that you've covered because they change annually?
Right.
As you said, what are some of the topics that you felt had the biggest impact?
Right. Yeah. So within the applied ethics, military ethics, I think the one we did in 2009 and 10, emerging military technologies. Nobody was really using that term at the time, and we looked at unmanned, including autonomous at the time, and human enhancement and non-lethal weapons, it was, I think that propelled conversations on all those topics.
Ahead of the curve that way.
Exactly.
Introducing some things.
Yeah. And cyber was one of those too. And there was so little literature on cyber that 2 years later, we spent the whole year on military cyber operations and ended up, I think, energizing that inquiry within the military ethics community too. So that was, I think, a very seminal year. We also did one year comparative warfare ethics, look into allies and adversaries warfare ethics, what they traditionally teach and then what they're teaching now in their military educational institutions. And that's generated a lot of publications from others who weren't even involved but who attended the conference.
That's great.
Yeah,
I remember that year well, and a fascinating in-depth look into cultures and military services that we don't oftentimes consider, at least in that regard. We think about their technical capabilities they bring to the fight, but not necessarily the philosophy that underpins the way they fight.
Right.
So that was fascinating, which is a great segue point into your topic this year. Describe for me the topic that you're engaged in this coming academic year and how that fits into this broader conversation that kicked off this past January in the form of the short film series on great power competition and the reason for this podcast series right now, Great Power.
Yeah, great power. So this year's topic is the ethics of great power conflicts. So what we're doing is resurrecting a lot of the issues we've looked at in the past. So AI-related military operations and gray zone conflict, including cyber, which usually falls within gray zone, and space weaponization. But we're looking for some other new topics too on this topic. For example, the draft. What are our obligations to serve the country?
Right.
So that's it's going to be probably 15 or so topics, and it's going to be a really interesting package for the conference.
You put them through some pretty significant readings too.
Yeah,
midshipmen as well as our visiting faculty, don't you? Yeah. It's an intensive readings course, almost like a graduate seminar.
It is.
Postdoc seminar. How do the mids fare in that environment?
They do very well, actually. Yeah. We grab mids who are in the UK programs. So these are at the top of the class, and they're going to graduate school and actually hopefully going to UK, Cambridge or Oxford.
Right.
And so
in the form of sometimes a Rhodes Scholarship, Marshall Scholarships, Fulbrights, things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. So they've been through, in their junior year, an intensive study program, and I grab my mids from that program.
Right.
So it serves to be as for them as a practice, for a graduate school situation. But they're also, because they're so well prepared, they contribute a lot to the seminar.
Yeah.
And they also allow the fellows to have a very up close and personal encounter with midshipmen.
That's great.
I mean, they get that in the classroom, but they get it even more so, I think, in the seminar. And that's actually one of the reasons why we bring the fellows in, not only for their expertise, but because there's such a civilian military gap in this country, especially within academia.
Sure.
So their encounter with the midshipmen, I think, helps to close that gap.
Yeah. They always come away better for it. I know when they get ready to depart at the end of their academic year in our kind of outbrief with them, it seems to me that the theme of those outbriefs has been how impressed they are with the level at which midshipmen operate.
They do.
Their ability to engage in conversation is more mature than they anticipated coming in, and they take away that primary lesson.
Right.
So that's great.
I had one fellow, I won't name him, who was liked the midshipmen so much that he left his university.
Is that right?
Job. Yeah.
Yeah. You kind of saw the caliber of students and said, I can't go back to teaching where he was before.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. We do get spoiled here. We do get spoiled here on a lot of levels. First and foremost by the midshipmen, just the quality of the young men and women that come to the Naval Academy. But we also have a pretty talented faculty and staff, like a very talented faculty and staff. Could you talk about your interactions as well around the yard? The Provost Cost Center, I know you've engaged with other departments, informed some ways that they've approached their curriculum. We have had the ethics across the curriculum effort here for a number of years and faculty workshops. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, my main interface has been teaching the core ethics course. I like to stay involved with the faculty that teach that. And through that, I can actually funnel in some of the topics that we've studied in some of the content, some of the publications.
Sure.
So that's, I think, the main contact with faculty. But then also when I have fellows who come in here and teach the core ethics course. And so I deal with the faculty that way, but also some of them are better suited to teaching over in, say, political science or history. And so I have good friends over in those departments, which help me find courses that the fellows can teach.
That's great. In fact, you have a fellow this year that's going to be teaching in both political science and history, I understand.
Yes, he's very eager to teach. And so, he's going to teach a course on the threats and strategies associated with the various geographic combatant commands. And then also Cold War history class. That's great.
So we're cross-pollinating the ethics program with other departments.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of fun. Speaking of cross-pollinating, we also have resurrected, as it's being called now, the Commandant of the Marine Corps Fellowship, which is top-level school equivalency. You have an active duty Marine Lieutenant Colonel, post-command Lieutenant Colonel that comes and sits in with you as well. How does that conversation look like with active duty in the room?
Yeah, it works very well, actually, and because they provide real-world empirical experiences that can add to the conversation. Yeah, many times we're talking about principles, but the way those principles can be applied in particular situations varies, and I would say most academics don't have that insight, and so it's really important to have somebody with the real world military experience to
that's great.
Lead the conversation in the right direction.
Yeah, you've had chaplains participate in the past. You've got somebody from Defense Intelligence University that has sat in very very regularly.
Exactly.
So it's quite an eclectic group.
We also get faculty members from the Naval Academy who want to do research on the topic that we're studying.
Right.
So it's typically a seminar of about 12, maybe 14 people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exciting. And great conversations having set in on a number of years. Let's dive into this year's topic, this idea of great power competition. You've already given us an overview of the topical areas within this broader kind of category of things to study. Where do you think we stand right now in terms of our competition, potential conflict? We very famously have that poster out in the hallway here at the Stockdale Center. We're at war. Are you doing everything you can to prepare yourself? Why don't you give me your characterization of the operating environment now and in the near-term future as an ethicist, as a political philosopher?
As an ethicist, okay. Well, everyone's talking about China and the party out there.
Right. That's right.
And they created a very difficult problem for us with their anti-access strategy and capabilities.
Right.
And so we're doing all we can to make sure we have a decent response to that in order to keep deterrence solid in that region.
Sure.
So that conventional deterrence effort involves a lot of things, including artificial intelligence, related weapons. Okay, and the one that's on everybody's mind is called lethal autonomous weapon system laws, or killer robots.
Right.
So we'll get into the literature on this topic, but there's been a lot of conversation about whether using these systems in that capacity as strike systems would create certain moral problems.
Sure.
Especially for the in bello criteria of the just war tradition, whether they could adequately discriminate between targetable and non-targetable individuals, and then even if they could, whether they could adequately do the ethical ethical analysis of the situation and target only as necessary and target proportionally.
Sure.
So that's a big conversation. These weapons would be wonderful to have, of course, and I wouldn't want to bias the conversation and say they will be unethical. I don't know that. We have to wait to see how they do. But we really want them. I mean, it would be great to have a long-range system that was stealthy and was quick in its decision-making and was not dependent on cyber and not dependent on space, and that could hold at risk mobile targets.
Yeah,
that's loss, and that's why we want it.
That's right.
And so it's a great system, but it's a new system, and it does bring up certain ethical questions.
Yeah.
So we've looked into that before. I think we've kind of contributed to the conversation. I know we have on that, and we'll continue to do that this year.
There are a lot of voices out there along those lines that will make the claim that we place constraints on ourselves, ethical constraints, for the use of weapon systems, that have autonomous capabilities. Yet our adversaries aren't constrained by the same sense of moral responsibility.
Right.
How do we answer that when that is put on the table by our active duty participants in the conversation or the midshipmen? Hey, they're doing that.
Right.
Why are we constraining ourselves in that way? That's a kind of a classic ethics
that's a classic
conversation, right?
I mean, the basic response to that is two wrongs don't make right. So we have to ascribe to our principles, but at the same time, not overly tie our hands, constrain ourselves either. And there's actually an emerging literature on this topic that deals with large-scale combat operations, ethics and law. Lisco lawyers were the group that started this conversation. In about 2021, a couple of JAGs from the Army talked about, there was a conversation about capability gaps in the Army, and they listed 17 of them, and they brought up an 18th capability gap, which was the ethical and legal one. And their argument basically was that because we've been used to doing counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations, where restraint served our interests and was very possible too. We expect an ethical war or an illegal war to look like that. But in a large-scale combat operation, there's not going to be the ability to delay and collect all the information. It might even be a communications denied environment, so we might not have as much information as we're used to having. And their point is, and that's permissible. Just because it looks differently doesn't mean it's immoral or illegal. There might be much more collateral damage, for example, in these type of situations. We're used to focusing on civilian protection, and we should still do that. But what's required is not exactly what what we previously.
Right.
So but expectations have changed, though. Now the
right.
civilians request or require want any war to look like that very constrained war that we've been fighting in the past, and that's not possible.
Right.
And so they brought up this point saying we really need to prepare our military decision makers included, and the civilians for a different looking war, which is nevertheless ethically and morally permissible and justified.
At the very heart of a conversation about military ethics, especially in light of the fact that you spent an entire year on comparative systems of military ethics. There's one particular work, I think from 1999, that the Chinese produce that got a lot of attention, Unrestricted Warfare, which essentially says there's no constraints when you're fighting a existential war for the nation's very survival. What does that mean? How should we interpret something like that as we prepare to face off against the Chinese in the perhaps not too distant future?
Right. No, that was a very seminal work and a great insight, especially happening in the same year as their entry into the World Trade Organization. And basically, the word unrestricted was defined in that periodical, that publication, in two ways. First, all activity, including economic activity, was part of conflict. Okay.
Yeah.
This is they don't make a distinction between like peaceful activity and
right. It's all part of one continuum.
Exactly. And then if it does come to blows, if there is kinetic conflict, no moral restraints. Exactly. So those two things, and we should have been a little bit more wise about the first. Okay. Yeah. That the economic, the trade, for example, was going to be fair.
Yeah.
It was not fair, and it was used to our detriment over time. They've accrued massive wealth, and created a huge military as a result of that.
With that wealth.
And so they've then been able to move then from the gray zone, so-called activities, to the major regional conflict activities. So they've made that transition over a period of about 20 years.
Yeah.
Because they used those, especially economic activities, in that way.
Right.
But on the more kinetic side, that was one of our conclusions, unfortunate conclusions from that year doing comparative warfare ethics, during which we interfaced with some PLA counterparts.
Yeah.
Okay, military ethicists. And they were so enamored of that conversation, they wanted to continue it. So for a number of years after, we continued to meet annually with them. And eventually the PLA representatives went away, and then we were meeting with civilian academics, and then they were not there either. So there's been obviously this
distancing,
exactly,
between countries. Yeah.
But the sad thing about that situation is that if you read the Confucian texts, the tradition, carefully, you can pretty much see all the Western just war criteria, ad bellum and in bello, in there about when to start a war, how to prosecute a war. They're there. But what we garnered from our conversations was that what was going to be morally in wars, whatever the PLA determined, was in its interest, and whatever
power of the party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever's necessary.
So we almost frame our poster, we're at war, or doing all you can. We talk so much about competition or conflict, and we kind of get into the nitnoids, perhaps the semantics of that. The Chinese don't suffer from that.
No.
It sounds like they've cast aside any notion of limitations or constraints on how they approach their task.
Yeah, it's not like a boxing match competition according to some rules.
Right.
There are no rules here.
Right.
Exactly. So
it's a street fight. They're up for a street fight, not Marcus of Queensberry rules.
Right, exactly. And then how to explain that, that's a longer conversation. Obviously they did have a century of humiliation, in between 1840 something and, the Opium Wars, and when the CCP took over in 1949. And so, they between the Europeans and the Japanese were seen as denied their place in the world that they had for centuries assumed. And they wanted become what they were again, especially say during the Ming Empire.
Right.
So, but to go to any means, use any means to get that back, that seems like a problem. And hopefully we're wrong about that. Maybe even for self-interested reasons, they would be more careful to, during a conflict, follow international law. But that my sense was that they didn't feel a strong need to worry about those types of things.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
There are many ways this great power competition that we're talking about so much can manifest itself. One of them is, our aiding Taiwan should China either blockade or just outright attack Taiwan. It's truly a knotty problem, as we say, or a wicked problem to figure out the defense of Taiwan. But that's only part of it, right? There's going to be other implications. How do we address an attack from one of the most populous nations on earth, a country with a massive economy, a country that has power, informational power, that it's kind of hard to compete with. They've got mass on their side. There's so many things about this particular fight that is setting up to be a specifically wicked challenge.
Right.
What are the ethical aspects of that full spectrum of possibility that we really should concern ourselves with?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and to their advantages, I would add that, as you said before, the tyranny of distance. The fact that they are just focused on one area, and it's near them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So they bring all that to bear right there.
Right.
And
South China Sea, first island chain.
Yep. And we're very far away. One thing that pops into my mind is the jus ad bellum criterion of reasonable chance of success.
Yeah.
So the question is, if we responded, would we do so successfully? Would we be able to attain the just cause of, say, defending Taiwan? That is difficult to know, but we need to get into the position where we could.
Right.
We could deter them, hopefully, and then if war broke out, we could successfully defend Taiwan. But that's an ethical issue that weighs on my mind. Is would the war be successful, and if not, it might be unethical to start to begin with. Yeah. Especially if the Taiwan was not going to be, say, completely destroyed like Carthage.
Right.
Okay. If that were the case, then maybe we shouldn't worry so much about that criterion. But if they're just going to be occupied not just, but if they're going to be occupied and their political system changed with the population, though, nevertheless still surviving, then that criterion, I think, needs to be applied.
So again, I'm fascinated with this idea of comparative ethics. And we've talked a little bit about the differences, philosophical differences, cultural differences between China and the United States in the series on great power. It's a lot easier to harness a national will when you have the type of coercive power possessed by the PRC. Right? I mean, they just have a more singular voice in all media, in all pronouncements, that forges a national will that some would argue, at least in a representative democracy like the United States, it's at best difficult, maybe even impossible, to muster the type of will required for near-peer competition. What do you say to those who criticize the United States' ability to muster the will necessary for this fight? How do we gain a stomach for this type of competition and conflict?
That's a huge question. I say to them that they're onto something. Okay, we were able to muster the will in, obviously, World War II. But since then, for whatever reasons, which we looked at and when we did a conference on the challenges of liberal democracy, we're not as united and willing to sacrifice. And part of what constitutes deterrence is the perception that you have the capability and the will. And so I think that will problem is a real problem, not just in the United States, but in the Western democracies. So that to tell you something about maybe the cause of this. There was a Gallup poll that came out in 2024, and it said it concluded that only 40% of Americans would want to defend their country. Okay,
40%.
40%. In Western Europe, 29%.
29%.
Yes, exactly. So
Wow.
there's something going on in these countries, and which would undermine our ability to deter and respond effectively. I mean, if we had a large number of losses in the initial phases of a situation out in the South and East China Sea, we might need to institute a draft.
Yeah.
What would that happen?
It's a great question.
We've not had this conversation. That's why this
Political conversation, a very difficult one.
Exactly.
Very
Totally.
difficult.
Yeah. And then even if we were able to successfully have a draft, what kind of people would be coming into the military with what kinds of values?
And motives.
Fire. Exactly. So this is, as you say, a knotty problem, and I don't think, like the Lisco lawyer issue we discussed, I don't think that there's been enough socialization of this as a problem, and the solutions might take a long time to generate any change, but.
And as our country becomes more polarized, that's certainly, point of conversation everywhere you turn these days. Polarization of our society, maybe even leading to the Balkanization, as in the Balkans all being these separate, distinct entities that don't gel well together.
Right.
This problem perhaps is getting worse as we go.
Exactly.
Is there an antidote to it? Is there something that if you could wave a wand that would bring together these divisions, that could kind of bind up this shredded, tattered social fabric that we suffer from in the United States right now?
Yeah. I mean, having attributed some of this problem, having read much of Alexis de Tocqueville's work many times, I am a big fan of liberal democracy, nevertheless.
Right.
I think it is the best system.
Yeah.
But nevertheless,
Churchill's quote comes to mind. It's the worst of all political systems, except all others.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But like Tocqueville, I think that we need to be and needed to be aware of some of the tendencies, the problematic tendencies of liberal democracies, including individualism.
Yeah.
And to deal with those, you have to have a concerted effort over a long period of time.
Yeah.
I think that social solidarity, for whatever reason, existed in the World War II generation and was in turn created by their joint effort in the war.
Right.
And lived on as social capital in our society for a number of decades, but they're gone.
Yeah.
And the situation now that we face is the result of not having been, I think, in tune enough to this problem associated with liberal democratic societies.
Yeah.
So as a solution,
we saw a little bit in 9/11, right?
Exactly.
In the years after 9/11, we had a little more cohesion, social, political,
exactly,
cultural cohesion.
Yeah. Right. But there are a variety of ways to cement societies together, and one of them is to be monoethnic, okay, but then we certainly don't have that, don't want that, okay.
Right.
And then you can share a culture, but we're seeming to go off in a different direction now that we have different conceptions of the good and what's right.
Rejection of the traditional melting pot approach to that. Yeah.
So you can cement people together with ideas, but those ideas are fragmenting, and with that, the identities of our citizens. So
Ed, it seems like a good topic for next year's conversation.
Exactly.
Maybe to examine the common values initiated by the founders that have survived in small ways, right, and big ways to this day. Maybe we're planting seeds for next year's conversation.
That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is still a lively issue, and we're going to take a look at more historically, the foundations of the founding and the moral foundations of the founding and the worries that the founders had.
Yeah.
And one of them was this, actually. Right. They had read their ancients and knew that these were possibilities. As a solution to all of this, given that we're multi-ethnic and multicultural, I would prescribe, and I know many have written about this, mandatory national service. I think there's a lot of misimpressions about the rectitude and the virtue of our fellow citizens.
Right.
Okay, and we do disagree about ideas, but I think if we encountered each other more, and especially in difficult situations, we would see that our co-citizens are decent people.
Yeah.
And that could provide the ability to change, and be a little bit more focused and have the will to sacrifice, restrain oneself, and actually give up oneself when necessary.
Right.
So this is
so structure, a cohesion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think especially in liberal democracies, you need to attend to this issue, and I think there's nothing better, from my experience, having served in the military, than serving in difficult situations with people from across your country.
Yeah.
You through that experience develop what Aristotle called political friendship or civic friendship. You see them as worth sacrificing for.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
Love that idea, especially since we're planting a seed for next year.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, we talk a lot about the pivot that the United States is making, the pivot in our developmental philosophy here at the Naval Academy in many ways, away from 20 plus years of that focus on counterinsurgency that you mentioned, and toward great power competition. On the ethics side, it seems to me our primary focus was in bello, that is to say, the justice of actual war fighting, the conversation from the Latin term jus in bello, justice in war, as opposed to ad bellum, which is justification to going to war. And in that conversation, everything seemed to revolve around restraint, discrimination, and proportionality.
Right.
So how do those specific pillars of military ethics change with the possibility of an existential threat from a near-peer competitor?
Exactly.
What do those things mean now?
Right. Well, the one that really pops out is proportionality.
Right.
Given what's at stake, a proportionate amount of collateral damage looks differently.
Right.
So that's what the military, especially decision makers and civilians, including our entire population, need to come to grips with.
Right.
Is that this is going to be a different looking war, which is nevertheless ethical and legal.
Yeah. Are we ready for that conversation?
That's what these LISCO lawyers were saying, that we are not.
Yeah.
The expectations that have been built up over the 20 years of doing coin and counterterrorism have created this impression that that's required.
Right.
And it's not. To include the requirement to use precision weapons, those may not work in some of these conflicts, and we may have to use so-called dumb bombs.
Right.
Because that's all we have, and that again is permissible.
Right.
And so yeah, there needs to be recalibration in expectations.
Well, of the many principles of war, the one that will come back into play in a very large way is going to be the principle of mass. It's assumed that the Chinese will be massing fires, since we're talking about the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right.
They'll be massing fires in the direction of U.S. forces and their allies. Can we assume that we're going to be massing fires in the direction of China, right, or Chinese interests, certainly in the defense of Taiwan? And if so, how does one even go through a calculation when you're massing fires?
Yeah, I mean, it's always very difficult to calculate determine what's necessary.
Yeah.
Combatant harm is necessary, and then what collateral damage is unavoidable and then proportionate.
Yeah.
But it will look a lot different, and that's permissible. It might be permissible given the stakes.
Right. So the conversations in the military ethics world are going to look a lot more similar to perhaps the conversations that were had during the Second World War.
Exactly.
That's our precedent for many things in this near-peer competition that we're heading into.
And that's uncomfortable. We're not used to thinking.
And we are
in those
not
terms.
used to that.
Yeah.
We're not having those conversations.
I think the lawyers brought up a great point, and I think they're having a lot of influence within the JAG community.
Right.
But whether that's being pushed out into the civilians is another question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
JAG community and in turn the targeteers and everybody involved in joint fires.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's interesting. So beyond that kind of traditional military ethics, you also mentioned cyber and some of these other ways that the competition will play out.
Right.
What are the things that we should be thinking about or be aware of, at least, in regard to moral responsibility of combatants or the ethical obligations of the force,
Right.
In those non-kinetic, I'd even say non-traditional arms of warfighting?
Right. Well, much of cyber activity up until this point, all of it, I would say, has fallen under the rubric of so-called gray zone operations.
Yeah.
So they're operations that are harmful, but don't that fall below the level of war. In other words, they're not lethal,
Right.
and therefore a lethal response would not be justified.
Right.
So but that may not be the future. The cyber capabilities exist that could do a lot of harm, and therefore could elicit a lethal response justifiably.
Right.
So I think that's another difference between the previous situation and the possible future.
Right.
And that, again, that conversation needs to happen. Our population needs to be socialized about that fact.
And you maintain this broader network from past fellows that have some deep expertise in these matters. I remember Jovana Davidovich at University of Iowa.
Yes,
right?
still there.
Yeah, still there, and she still connects with the center here on various conversations. Last year, I think she participated throughout the year.
Yeah.
How are you crafting that larger or cultivating that larger network to help answer these tough questions? Because these are big, challenging questions. The more people we have, the more perspectives we have from the outside of the Department of Defense. It can be really critical to making the best decision.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the folks, maybe Jovana included, how you keep them in the fold and kind of serving the purposes of making better decisions?
Right. Well, they participate in the seminar.
Yeah.
So they enjoy all the topics every year, and so they return. Jovan is a senior fellow. She focuses on AI related activities, ethics, and so she'll be part of this conversation for sure this year. We have Mitt Regan, a law professor at Georgetown, who is also a senior fellow and has a lot of expertise in many of these topics, including AI. So he'll be part of that conversation. So we just maintain the relationships with the people annually through the seminar. I make sure I have the right people in the room every year, and they tend to be interested in our topic and then show up.
Yeah, that's great. So it's the cross institutional ties as well. It's not just the individuals, but you maintain some institutional ties.
I thought of something too. We also have guest speakers at the seminar that can either be here in person or virtually, and we get additional expertise that way. And then,
that's great.
Then at the conference, we have speakers that come from all over the world who are the experts on these various topics.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about those speakers before we get into the institutions? Let's talk about some of the speakers, because you've had some really big names here over the course of the past several years at least.
Yeah. One that pops to mind is Francis Fukuyama. Yeah. Who's written famously on the end of history and many other things, and is a great political theorist. And he was here a couple of years ago on our conference on challenges facing liberal democracies. And in addition to him, on the same topic was Patrick Deneen, who's a so-called post-liberal who's highly critical of liberal democracy and has proposed alternatives. Yeah. We. The one thing I found over the years is that if you call somebody or email them and mention the Naval Academy, they become immediately interested.
That's great.
Yeah, they really want some access to what we do here and to contribute. Right. And so over the years, I've had Michael Walzer, one of the doyen of military ethics.
That's right.
And he was at the conference last year on the relationship between the ethics and law of war. Right. So we've been very lucky.
And they oftentimes take on an international flavor. You've brought folks in from the UK and from Europe and various parts of the world. Right. Which brings me to, we'll go back to the institutional tie-ins. You're also very active in the International Society for Military Ethics, right? ISME. Could you talk a little bit about how you personally, and maybe the Stockdale Center more broadly, maintains those type of connections to ensure this is a a very broad, almost universal conversation of those things of interest to the military ethics community.
Right, right. Well, there was something called JSCOPE, a military ethics annual meeting in the United States, and then eventually it changed its name to ISME, International Society of Military Ethics. And when I got here, I started participating in that conference annually and giving papers. And through that conference, I ended up meeting people from Europe, and they were very interested in creating a European version of that. And I actually work with them to do that.
Right.
And so I also go to that conference every year, which is excellent.
Right.
And then also I work to help create one in the Asia Pacific region, which was really getting going, and then COVID kind of killed it, and now it's people are attempting to resurrect it.
Great.
And we've also tried to create these societies in Latin America and the Middle East with limited success. Basically, what we've had to do is make sure that people from those regions come to our conferences, especially the one in Europe.
Right.
So we've had some success at making those links.
Right.
But basically, the principle of just showing up and saying something that's helpful prevails here. That's what I try to do every year at both of those conferences, and then hopefully at the Asia Pacific version too.
Yeah.
And then through that, you build relationships and collaborations with the people all over the world, and in part because you introduce new topics that we've worked on here to them.
Yep.
And that changes their research programs and even their policy conversations.
Sure.
So a couple of years ago, we did AI, and we had a couple of researchers from Peace Research Institute Oslo, PRIO, who have gone on to get government grants to look at military artificial intelligence. And these grants are affecting policies as far as NATO, as broadly as NATO.
Yeah. On the point of NATO, I mean, you were also pretty instrumental in the reference curriculum developed by NATO's Partnership for Peace program, which is taught not only in NATO member countries, but in Partnership for Peace countries, which include former Soviet republics, countries in Africa, and things like that. You've been involved in more than one or two of those. Could you talk about how that participation goes? Just using the leadership and ethics reference curriculum as an example. What's the impact of that? How does that conversation take shape? How does it form?
The impact of that. Well, I mean, many nations want to implement a curriculum like that. That's why we wrote it. And so we get requests to go to these various countries and help them implement it in a way that's relevant to their situation. But also the reference curriculum has created an interest in those topics. And so we've gone to conferences. We were in Romania this past year, and they based their whole conference on the topics that we introduced in that curriculum. Right. So they weren't as interested so much in their developing their curriculum as much as just creating a conversation within their community on these topics. Right. So it's been very effectual.
So it's back to the role of dissemination.
Exactly.
Playing dissemination.
Exactly.
Here, getting the information that's developed in seminars oftentimes, conversations born of that, out in front of as many people as possible in as many formats as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
Excuse me.
So it's kind of on that point. Let me, bring it back to the things that are developed for midshipmen. Because that is a critical role the center plays, the down and in part.
Yeah.
Can you talk about maybe some of the case studies or provide some examples of things that are in use in the core ethics classroom that were born of these conversations and how those things took shape and how they were developed over time?
Well, two come to mind. The first is when I got here, the issues associated with contemporary war part of the course was very outdated.
Yeah.
And so when we did our year on cyber in 2011 and 12, one of the faculty members who teaches the course with me, Chris Eberly, was in it, and as a result wrote the article that we use in the core ethics course. So we were able to interject a whole class or two on military cyber operations and gray zone more generally. And Dr. Eberly wrote that piece that all the midshipmen read.
Right.
That's one example. Another example is we had a whole conference on moral injury at one point. It was a year on moral virtue and some contemporary research on that, and then moral injury as a counterpart to that. And that generated a lot of interest. And now that is included in NE 203, the core ethics course.
Right.
And our director of ethics, our chair of ethics, David Luban, wrote that piece,
Right.
which all the midshipmen read.
Yeah. An incredibly accomplished scholar.
Yeah.
With an unbelievably lengthy resume of publications.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But before we move off this idea of moral injury, I think there's going to be some people who listen to this and they don't know exactly what that means. It's been such an important point of conversation, especially through that period of counterinsurgency,
right,
and small wars and so on.
Right.
Can you describe what you mean by moral injury, and what is it that we do here that addresses this matter?
Oh, good point. Okay. Well, there are basically 3 definitions of moral injury in the literature, and I'm partial to one of those. Okay. So the first definition is you witness somebody doing something wrong, or at least you perceive to be wrong, and you lose trust as a result, in especially leadership. You're morally injured, so-called. And the second is related to guilt, that you transgress what you perceive to be a moral boundary and feel guilty about that. And that can shade into PTSD symptoms also, and you have to disentangle actually the cause of that. But then the third one is the loss of virtue. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that should be the focus of this inquiry into moral injury. The fact that through situations, the pressure that combat places on people, they may end up doing things that they know are wrong repeatedly, and then through that repetition, forget that they're wrong and actually become vicious, lose their virtue.
Right.
That's real moral injury. And that can happen.
Right.
That can happen. And because of that possibility, you need really good leadership to be watching people, to make sure they're not going down that dark side. Right. And
so this is a long-standing conversation, right? This is something that relies on a philosophy that's millennia old, right?
It goes all the way back to Aristotle.
Right.
That the people can be made virtuous, but they can become vicious also.
Right.
And that needs to be, especially in military situations where people are tired and they're angry.
Right.
They're scared.
Yep.
They can give in, and then once you give in repeatedly, that can change your character. So how we address that is we started a whole week on this actually.
Yeah.
I do want to say though that much of the so-called moral injury associated with guilt is probably as Marx would say, false consciousness. People think they've done something wrong, but they haven't.
Right.
They're not culpable for what they did, or maybe what they did was justified too, and they don't understand that.
And helping Marines, sailors, soldiers, airmen understand what those responsibilities are, ethical responsibilities are, is part of this.
Yep.
And so you're providing, back to the idea of the philosophy that underpins this, the philosophy of Aristotle, Aristotelian philosophy, Aretaic philosophy, moral excellence, and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that philosophical grounding that midshipmen get? Because I think before a certain date, if you graduated from the Naval Academy prior to, I don't know, the late 1990s, you may not realize how much philosophy the midshipmen are actually getting in the core ethics course, as an example. Could you describe some of that?
Yeah, we spend the first, I would say, 5 weeks on a moral decision-making roadmap that basically helps them to figure out what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
In other words, we provide action guiding principles.
Right.
Okay. But there's a long tradition, as you mentioned, of thinking about action enabling. So given that they know what's right and wrong, how do you get people to tend to do that?
Right.
And that gets into the formation of virtue through repeatedly doing the right thing and knowing that it's why it's right.
Yeah.
And the relationship between doing the right and being a flourishing human being.
Right.
That becomes a disposition, which they then take into all situations.
Habituation.
Exactly.
That Aristotle describes.
Exactly. And so So that's a huge part of the core ethics course. I think we spend probably 5 weeks on that course, and at the very end of that, on that topic, and at the very end of it, we round it out by talking about moral injury. Okay, we've talked a lot about how virtue enables you to do the right thing, but then we'll talk a little bit about how the virtue can be undermined in certain situations.
Right.
I do want to emphasize, though, and I'm constantly a gadfly in these conversations about moral injury, that having been in combat situations and having known those who've been in combat, most people emerge from combat as better people.
Yeah.
Okay. We can go way too far with this moral injury conversation.
Sure.
It does occur, and it needs to be prevented and treated. But nevertheless, we shouldn't globalize this or exaggerate.
So the concept of post-traumatic growth, I mean, that
Exactly.
in so many ways, that's in keeping with the message of Admiral Stockdale, right?
Right.
Admiral Stockdale very explicitly says that he came out better as a result of what most of us couldn't even imagine, which is the horrific conditions in the Hanoi Hilton for nearly 8 years.
Yeah.
But somehow he can make the claim that he's better as a result of it.
And it makes sense. You are voluntarily risking your life for your country and for those with whom you're fighting.
Yeah.
That is the definition of human flourishing.
Yeah.
And if you do that for a long time, that makes you into a different person.
Yeah. Well, we spend so much time in conversations about character here at the Naval Academy. This is all, of course, very closely tied. Character conversations are associated with virtue ethics in many cases. And I think we also make the case that in the 47 months that we have midshipmen here in Annapolis, that so much beyond the classroom contributes to their character formation. You want to we'll step outside of your role just as a professor in the classroom or as a researcher. Right. Can you talk about the holistic experience here at the Academy and how character formation happens in this environment?
Okay. Well, I want to focus on, at least first, on sports.
Sure.
And we were athletes. You're an athlete. And so we have experience with this. Backing up, there's a theory about the interdependence of the virtues.
Right.
In other words, to be a just person, you also need to be a courageous person, one who's able to face down pain, and a temperate person, one who's able to resist pleasures in the appropriate way.
Right.
So you need those other two in order to, say, be just, and that's exactly what sports develops.
Yeah. Or as a Master Chief we had a conversation with a little while ago, embrace the suck. So when it's uncomfortable, sometimes that's where we learn the most and develop the most.
Exactly. I would say that the effect of pain and pleasure on us moves our will in ways that we don't necessarily want to move. And so developing those virtues through sports frees our will to then do what we know is, say, just. Yeah. And so it's really important for this overall ethics project to go through those experiences.
So even a moral philosopher can look at the holistic experience here.
Yeah, for sure.
And include athletics, include life in Bancroft Hall and the things that they experience there and leadership positions and so on.
Yeah, as a former gymnast and former military pilot, I think I have some direct experience about the importance of those.
That holistic development.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. If you would put a finger on something, though, that's either missing or maybe we should double down on here, for character formation, or so midshipmen better understand their ethical obligations as officers in the Navy and the Marine Corps. What would be some of those things that we could expand upon here?
Okay. Well, I recently received a grant to do workshops on cultivating and assessing moral virtue. Yep. And the one thing that really pops out is, and I'm guilty of this too, is unclarity about this virtue of prudence. Okay, so you create these dispositions to be just and to be courageous and temperate, but allowing that to happen and allowing you to use those properly is this virtue of practical wisdom or prudence. Yeah. And exactly what that is, and then how that's created, including through our courses, I don't think is very well understood. Yeah. And we looked at this about 4 years ago, which allowed me to get that grant. And so in these workshops, I want to look a little bit more closely at that, because I think we're doing many of the things that develop that, but I don't think we know that that's what we're doing.
True.
And in some, so we tend to maybe like belittle the intellectual side of say ethics, but that's extremely important to the virtues,
because it enables you to think through
exactly
that aspect of practical wisdom. So there's a constant debate out there, and to put it maybe crudely, what's more important, the book learning, right? The curriculum we give them in school, or is it the school of hard knocks? Is it the challenges associated with life in Bancroft Hall, life in summer training and various things? But practical wisdom, it seems to me, or prudence, is the combination of the book learning and the school of hard knocks. What place better than a service academy for that combination?
Exactly.
We're back to the holistic development of midshipmen now.
And maybe what we can do too is try to help them reflect on what's going on in that school of hard knocks, and that reflection then becomes the practical wisdom, which we can reinforce in the classroom.
Yeah, without some kind of theoretical framework, experiences won't mean much.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just something to be survived, rather than be reflected upon in a constructive way, so that you become better for the next go.
Yeah, we're reason-guided beings, and therefore we need that intellectual component to keep the virtues stable.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, this is more evidence that the broad liberal education that occurs here at the Naval Academy, covers such a broad swath. I think there's many people who will listen to this, and given the very STEM focused nature of the Naval Academy, as it should be, is also deeply rooted, deeply grounded in philosophical traditions that make our graduates well-rounded in the end.
Well, every year I look at U.S. News and World Report top liberal arts colleges, and the Naval Academy is in the top 20. Because it's not only STEM-centric, but it has a great core curriculum, which gives them the knowledge that they need. Character-related knowledge, but then also, as you mentioned, these extracurricular activities, I think, develop them and impart that knowledge too.
All a big part of that.
So I think we're doing a good job. Actually.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always room for improvement in some ways, but from everything I've seen over the number of years I've been here, we've got a great formula.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And your contributions over these, 18 years now have been considerable to all this.
Thanks.
So Ed, I'm grateful for your time today and the larger service you've provided to this institution and country, and thanks.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.